afternoon and welcome to this live panel discussion on whether or not the trade digitisation landscape is finally maturing. My name is Eleanor Wragg and I'm a senior reporter at GTR. Joining me today for what I know will be an interesting session are four experts, each of whom are bringing trade into the digital era from different angles. We've got Bertrand Chen, Chief Executive Officer of the Global Shipping Business Network, or GSBN. We've got Josh Kroeker, Chief Product Officer at Contour. Sriram Muthukrishnan, Group Head of Product Management at DBS. And Billy Sebell, Head of Ecosystem Development for Shinfin and Executive Director for the XDC Foundation. A very warm welcome to all of you and thank you for joining me. Now, as I just mentioned, all of you are working on new developments, and before we get stuck in, I want to get a very quick update from each of you. So, Billy, XDC is the network behind the world's first trade finance-based non-fungible token, or NFT, transaction. Can you explain XDC and the Shinfin network and how it's solving for pain points in trade?
Sure. Thanks for having me here. Great to join the panel. Yeah, so the XCC Network is a hybrid blockchain that was created by originally Xinfin, and the XCC Foundation is the decentralized autonomous organization really behind the development and support of the growth of the network. And so we have both private and public state that the private subnets can run on the network with a limited set of data that is relayed to the public network, the public XCC network. And we're an enterprise-ready network that works with organizations and enterprises in trade finance.
Fantastic. Thanks very much for that introduction. I'm going to go over to you now, Bertrand. So GSBN is a Hong Kong-based blockchain consortium incorporated in March 2021, I believe, by 8 global shipping lines and terminal operators. Can you tell us briefly why we need GSBN and how it's integrating shipping and finance?
Sure. Thank you for having me today. Yeah, so GSBN stands for Global Shipping Business Network. And the area we're focusing specifically on the shipping side of global trade. I believe all the panelists are coming from the bank side. So what we're trying to create is a not-for-profit blockchain consortium to allow the shipping line, the terminal, the freight forwarder, the BCO, even the banks to actually collaborate. And one thing we identified that's really needed is to have all those people working together to solve the problem. And what GSBN is providing really is this foundational data layer to allow all those guys to collaborate. And we've already started to launch some products in China, in Southeast Asia, and also we did some collaboration on the banking side. So working with, for instance, Contour, with Josh at Contour, and also with the DBS team as well. So looking forward to talk more about those projects.
Excellent, thank you. Let's talk about Contour a little bit. So Josh, Contour is, as I'm sure people know at this point, a blockchain-based digital trade finance network. Now, you've been doing a lot recently, and one of the things that you've done is kind of turn your sights to the legal entity identifier, the LEI. I'm kind of interested to hear what's the motivations behind this and how this can help with the wider digitization of trade.
Yeah, happy to. So I guess Contour, as I hope lots of people know, is sort of this foundational network for trade finance with banks, corporates, and partners. But when people come to that network, they need to bring their identity. And now, of course, Contour could create a Contour-specific identity and have that be proprietary. But that isn't really going to help digitization, because digitization for us is about connection. You know, Contour was created to bring together banks and corporates on a common network, but we realized that digitization is going to be more than just Contour. All of our banks and corporate members will likely need to join multiple networks to do end-to-end digitization. And when they go to each of those networks, they're going to need to think about what is their identity in that network. So the Global LEI Foundation is doing this great work by giving everyone a trusted, unique identifier that they can take as sort of a passport to each of these digital platforms, to their bank, to Contour, to GSBN, to other networks, so that when you want to integrate all these things and have data flow between them all naturally and seamlessly, it's going to work, and you're not going to have any issues with, a different legal identity signed up to one platform and a slightly different name in another one, and then all the APIs break. So it's really going to help interoperability at the participant level, which we think is really important to that end-to-end digitization.
Thanks for that great intro. Sriram, as Bertrand just mentioned, DBS is, well, you're part of the GSBN advisory group, you're a member of Contour, you're also involved in numerous other trade digitization initiatives. So given this involvement in all these different areas, I wanted to get your take on the extent to which the market's maturing. Are you still hedging your bets as to where to invest, or do you think the market's starting to coalesce around a smaller number of solutions?
Thank you, Eleanor. I mean, if I were to answer that, I think I would say the market is definitely maturing. But as it matures, it's throwing up new flywheels and new opportunities for us to use new capabilities. So it's not staying static. So we maybe started with a problem statement a few years back, maybe 10 years back, and we sometimes get frustrated that specific problem hasn't been solved. But the technology is evolving, and the collaboration opportunities are evolving so that we can solve a lot more problems than we even set out to solve in the first place. For example, currently, at DBS, especially my team, we find it very, very interesting, in a few fronts. So one of the ways technology is evolving is opportunities for us to look at embedded banking and embedded finance, when we can embed ourselves seamlessly into customer ecosystems and supply chains. The second one, is where we are able to use data, of course, with the right permissions and for the right reasons, in a way that we can provide transactional lending and services contextually to customers who are on that platform and who would love to receive these services from us. And of course, there's a sustainability angle to all of this. And lastly, but not the least, is consortia and industry-led initiatives where we are able to then work with a wider network, such as Contour, such as Hevia Connect. We are part of the Hevia Connect Sustainable Rubber initiative in Singapore. We partnered with, on the payments and wholesale clearing side, with JPM and Temasek on Partior. We are on SG TradeX in Singapore. So there are so many new ways that this is evolving, and really happy to be part of all this.
Great. Well, thanks all of you for that scene setter. Just to remind our audience, we are live, so do feel free to use the Q&A box to pose any questions that you have to our speakers, and I'll make sure we get around to them. Now, one of the things that I've noticed over the past sort of year and a half of doing these virtual conferences, it's a lot of talk about trade digitization, right? And every time we gather, we say that we're nearly there, right? But we haven't got there yet. We've seen during the pandemic, trade digitization efforts got this political capital that we could really only ever have dreamed of before. But it does seem that the kind of net effect of this has been pockets of innovation and digital islands. And this is something that you touched on, Josh, in your introduction. All of you are working on these really exciting initiatives, but do you guys think that there's a clear enough roadmap for the whole trade ecosystem to collectively reach this goal of digitization? Josh, I'm going to start with you.
Okay, great. No, I think we've come a long way. So in last year's GTR Asia conference, we would have been in our beta phase. So a year ago, where people were doing live transactions, but it was free access, it was still testing. Now we've been in full production since the beginning of the year. We have new customers joining every day. People are now doing their regular business on the platform, and that's only going to grow as the network grows. So I think we're sort of moved away from experimentation, POCs, and now are really towards the stage where people can start to scale their use in production networks. And it's not something that Contour is doing alone. It is about choosing the networks that you need to be a part of, for shipping, for electronic bills of lading, for trade finance, et cetera, and then forcing those guys to work together to make sure that they're interoperable and the solution does provide that end-to-end service. So I think the emergence, I'll use the word foundational platforms, and I know Bertrand and I have talked about this in the past, is now starting to happen. And also what we're seeing is, networks like Contour are also forming labs that can do the experimentation as well. So people who want to explore different applications that are not yet in production don't need to go and experiment and then have to build a network around that solution. They can come to Contour or experiment with a new application, and then you have a network to deploy it to right away, which is going to make that sort of time to market so much shorter than it has been in the past.
Excellent. Sriram, I'm going to back the same question over to you because you've got a different perspective as a bank. What's your take? Where are we at in terms of breaking down the silos?
I think we are all aware of the problem. That is what I would say as a start. I think there's a lot of talk about the need for interoperability and also the need to collaborate. I see that a lot more than in the past. And I think this whole move towards open banking is another thing that people are talking about. So all of this means that we are now starting to build capabilities which can talk to each other. We always will have digital islands. I think it's a given. I'm not for 1 minute of the opinion that we'll suddenly have everything so seamlessly interconnected and all on a single platform. That won't happen. But what I think is that people are building with a specific eye on interconnectivity. So the silos will get broken in that way. I talked about SG TradeX in Singapore. The regulators, the MA is actually supporting us. We're part of this initiative. We're creating this overarching layer for data interconnectivity based on use case. It doesn't mean everybody has access to everybody else's data, but there are permissions and there are levels of security. But within that, we can create use cases, and those which are participating in that use case don't need to create new architecture, new highways for data. We can actually connect seamlessly through that. So I think that's a step in the right direction. But then again, that is one country. So we'll have to see how this sort of mushrooms on a more regional basis. Global is, I think, again, too much to aspire for. Apart from that, some of the initiatives that we talked about in terms of documentary trade, digitization, I think there is some good activity happening. We talked about GSBN and Contour and what they're doing, but also legislation in the form of MLETR, the model law, which is also coming through. How soon it gets deployed in all of the 200 odd jurisdictions, I don't know. But I think if the key jurisdictions, of which Singapore is one, and has already signed up that into law, means that we are moving in the right direction. So I'm quite, as you can see, an optimist. I don't think we'll wave a magic wand and these problems will go away. We've created these problems ourselves over the last 100 odd years, and we will take at least another 10 years probably to solve them for all of mankind. But I think we're moving much faster. Also, I do feel that the pandemic has also accelerated people's focus on this whole digitization, and they're more amenable to using digital means. In the past, I just run across to the bank or I'll send my courier guy over. I think that thinking is going away, and I think it also bodes well for the future.
Excellent. So we've heard a solution provider perspective, a bank perspective. I want to hear the shipper's perspective, because the shipping industry has very different aims, very different kind of competitive environment. So Bertrand, what's your take?
Yeah, so I think I would agree in general with what Sriram and Josh said, right? I think over the last 5 years, what you've seen is that so many projects, so many POC, so many different initiatives. And right now, I think to reuse the concept from game theory, you're reaching what we call shedding points, which is you're converging towards 1 or 2 per silos, per segment platform, who potentially will have the promises of getting enough buying from the right people. And those will form what I think we just shared, the foundational layer upon which you can build a lot of solutions. Because ultimately, for a shipper, he doesn't care if he's on GSBN, if he's on Contour. He doesn't care what the foundational layer platform is, right? It's all about, do I have application that solves my problem? So I think that's probably the most important thing from the shipper perspective. And to go back to what Sriram said, in terms of initiative that he's seeing, I think from SG TradeX in Singapore, about data interchange. So what I observe is we start to see that across the region, not just in Singapore. So Shanghai, for instance, has something called the Shanghai CDI project, also in the free trade zone. Hong Kong has also a CDI. So what you actually start to see is across the region, more and more from a policy perspective, the government is trying to facilitate this kind of data interchange. Now, the biggest question obviously is, I think to go back to your question, you have a bunch of small islands, right? They don't talk to each other. They have different APIs. Are we going back to locally everything's integrated, but then it's not a solution that, let's say, a big customer, let's say ExxonMobil, right? He doesn't really care if in Singapore are doing this way, in Shanghai is this way, in Hong Kong is this way. So you will gonna need still, I would say, I think to some degree what Contour and GSBN try to do, which is a global a foundational layer, which can talk to all those different islands of innovation. So that's really how I think from the shipping side we're thinking. And then to go back to the momentum we're seeing for digitization right now, for the first time in the last, I would say 30 years of the shipping, global container shipping, the shipping are making money. So that's actually quite rare. As the industry, typically, you always have the cycle of boom and bust, price go higher, lower, but the shipping line traditionally doesn't make money. As the industry is really difficult to make money. But for the first time, because of this disruption, the shipping crunch, you suddenly have the shipping line making money. And I think that's also making a big difference in the sense that they can start to commit to long-term investment in technology, and which I think will start to do something interesting for the market.
Really, really great point. Billy, I wanted to talk to you about a slightly different topic. One of the pieces of work that you guys are doing is with the TFD initiative, right? Which essentially, to kind of boil it down into a few seconds, is really helping to close the trade finance gap by, enabling investors to come into trade finance. And you're, I think, the first blockchain company to have joined the TFD initiative. What kind of reception has there been? Do people get it? Do they understand the use case for blockchain?
Yeah, it's a good, well, I think in general, I think the importance of what we've done has really been understated. This is an effort that's been in the making for 5 years, through Trade Tech and the TFD. And I think that the components and all of the pieces that it takes, to get things really working on blockchain, from having custody solutions in jurisdictions where you can actually custody, coins or NFTs or whatever you're actually doing the tokenization in a regulated, market. It's very difficult. And so essentially there's really the development of all of this really comes down to kind of like cobbling together a lot of technology in order to be able to do it. And the cycle of where you start from the beginning to where you want to get to at the end, there's a lot of components in blockchain that still need to be put into place. So you're limited by jurisdiction, and you have challenges around that. So I think that getting to where we've gotten to is actually a pretty significant milestone. And I think that how we move forward is really going to be dependent upon how quickly some of these technologies can be developed, and then how they can be incorporated into different jurisdictions. And I think that it's important. You really have to, from the very base of it, it really comes down to what's the ecosystem you're building. And the TFD is really an ecosystem of players that have come together, similar to a lot of the other, consortium that are out there that are really trying to make something happen in a very specific area. And I think once you're able to really do that on a real consistent basis, day in and day out, kind of the way, Josh is talking about what Contour has been able to do from going from beta, to, where you're in live production, getting to that point takes a lot of work. The scaling up is far easier at that point once you have all those pieces in place. So we're very excited about what we've been able to do, and really focused on how we scale that up from where we are now.
Excellent. You raised a couple of points there, sort of about the regulatory and the legislative side of things. I'm going to stick a pin in those. I'm going to come back to them. But
sure.
I just wanted to get a feel as well, obviously you're all very bullish about the benefits of digitization because it's literally your job. But I wanted to get a feel for what you're hearing from the rest of the ecosystem, what you're hearing from corporates, what you're hearing from clients. I think I'm going to stick with you, Billy, because you come from the crypto space, right? So you're probably more familiar than most with the hype cycle. At what stage do you think we are in the hype cycle when it comes to trade? Is blockchain fatigue setting in? Where are we?
Well, that's a good question. I guess it depends on where you're kind of the paradigm you're kind of looking at it from. But I think that, well, as far as trade finance goes, we're really at the very beginning of what we're going to be able to do. So I think actually really I don't know if it's the hype cycle, but I think that for those people that are really working on what we're doing and really understand where we're at, I think there's a lot of excitement in what we're putting together, and there's no lack of participants that want to come in and play, in that sandbox, so to speak. I think that if you look at things from a retail perspective and just generally how people view things, I think there's this general sense of, all of these different projects, and this is something you get in crypto all the time. Everyone's going to be working with everyone, and it's this very like, there's not a lot of development of thought around how that's actually going to work. We're really just focusing on trying to get that trade finance transaction done and the tokenization done, and we're not concerned with who we're going to be working with 3 years down the road. From an interoperability perspective, in which we've already discussed here a little bit, we're open to working with everyone or anyone who wants to work with us. And we are definitely connectors, and that's really kind of the development of the ecosystem. But that takes time, and there's a lot of development work to do any interoperable integration with another chain or a consortium. And so I think that you just have to really look at what you can offer others and what they can offer you, and try to find that point where you can work together. And that's how you kind of bring together a much larger environment. So I think with all of that, I think we feel really good about it. I don't know if hype on our end is really important to us. We just really like to work at what we're doing and try to make good things happen as we move forward.
Great. So I'm going to bat a similar question over to Josh, because there's so much excitement around what Contour is doing. Where do you feel that's landing at the moment? Have you been able to kind of meet expectations? Do you think that blockchain is meeting expectations overall?
Yeah, so I think we can go back to that hype cycle sort of analogy, right? And I think maybe 2 years ago, everyone thought blockchain would solve all the problems immediately, and there was sort of a trough of delusionment that follows when people realize that, it's actually just, it's quite boring. It's change management. It's moving everything into new systems and then allowing for innovation to happen. So yeah, I think that's where we're at. We're trying to make blockchain quite boring. I think the use of blockchain is very, very foundational to some people who say, I need my data to be self-hosted. I need my data to be in a certain country. And for that reason, we use a decentralized technology. But for a lot of corporates and banks, they just want to get the benefit of your application. They just want to log in. They want to treat it more like a SaaS solution. And for them, the challenge isn't so much blockchain. It's more about, okay, how do I get the rest of my network in? How do I plug in the other parts of the ecosystem? And again, it becomes more of a change management solution. So I think we're trying to cut through a lot of the clutter. There's still quite a lot of confusion in the market saying, there's a new thing, every month. That doesn't really help us because then everyone wants to wait and say, okay, let's wait till the space settles a bit. But I think we're getting now to a place where, we are reaching that sort of foundational level where people are saying, okay, I know I can't do everything yet, but I also know there's a future proofness to these types of networks. I can join now and do some basic processes in a better way. We started with letters of credit, as a lot of people know. And then as our network grows, we'll add guarantees, we'll add open account. We add more and more connections to the rest of the ecosystem, and even DeFi and secondary markets. And I think that's what's sort of exciting down the road. But I think the message is you don't need to wait for all of that. You don't even have to wait for sort of MLETR and all of these legal standards to become adopted worldwide. There are ways to get going right now. And I think there's options there that are very feasible. So yeah, making blockchain boring is where we're at.
I like that. I'm going to hand this over to Bertrand, because I hear, when I speak to various people in various parts of the ecosystem at GTR, because we speak to everybody, I do hear a lot that, for example, shippers they aren't that bothered about, for example, the electronic bill of lading, because they've got 48 other documents, right, to kind of grapple with. So is that concept that Josh has sort of alluded to of getting that minimum viable solution up and running, just do something, is that enough for the shippers? What's the kind of the feedback that you're getting?
Well, I think you're absolutely right? There is a kind of this minimum threshold of solving some key problem before people start to adopt a new solution, especially if the new solution is very different than the existing solution. So I would say in general, people in the shipping industry has been doing this job for a long time, and they don't want to change, very simply. Even in the situation of COVID, you really have to force them, don't use paper, or because you can't go to work, you can't go to the counter because of restriction. And in those situations, people start to look at digital solution, but still, if they can revert back to old way of doing things, they still want to do it. So I think this minimum threshold, the concept from the startups in the tech world, which is you need to have a 10x better experience, that's very true. So if you don't have a 10x user experience improvement, why do I switch to a digital solution? And then to go back to the question you were asking about which stage we are in the hype cycle of blockchain, I really think people don't care about blockchain anymore. They don't want to know if your solution is a blockchain, not blockchain. Most of the shipper doesn't care about this, right? They just want, can the solution solve my problem or not? And that's why from our standpoint, when we go to talk to people, there's really two types of conversation we're having. Some conversation is about the foundation layer of the blockchain. This typically has to do more with the business model of GSBN, the fact that shipping line, freight forwarder, terminal have to share data. And there's competitive dynamics between them so that they don't want everybody to see their data. So that's really what blockchain is solving. The application that's built on top of that is completely removed from that. It has nothing to do with the blockchain component. And then just to add on to the question you're asking is, what will make the adoption really tick up effectively? Is that enough to solving this problem? So I think there is a couple, a theme that you can borrow from the world of crypto, which is if you look at the world of DeFi, right, or anything that's developed on top of Ethereum right now, the biggest concept that I think is really getting a lot of traction is the concept of composability between different solutions. So if you have, let's say, some concept that's like a AMM or flash loan, a different type of product that's people developing, by composing them, you can create new product. And that's typically how you solve novel problem. And I think there's similar concept here in the trade digitization, which is there are products that you can build on top of GSBN that specifically solve some of the issue for the shipping, the logistics side. There are some solutions that Josh can provide on contour side, which is the way the banks and the corporate interact. By composing a solution, we can solve some problem that's not solvable right now. I think that's really the key to potentially breach this threshold, right? So if you don't remember, the first iPhone I got is this couple of function that was great. I think you have to wait for iPhone 3G to have something that's useful. Before that, it's just people to Zoom. So I think that's literally where we are right now. We have the first iPhone, but how do we get to the next level? We solve real problem.
Exactly. Now, both Bertrand and Josh, you have said the phrase change management. So I'm going to run with that and take that over to Sriram. So Sriram, you've done quite a few transactions, sort of with Contour, various other things like you've mentioned, SG, TradeX, etc., etc. When you are getting corporates to kind of join you on this journey, how difficult is it? And do you think we've got the incentive design right? We talk so much about efficiency, about cost savings. Is that resonating with them?
Oh, that's a tough question, which we keep grappling with, because I think one of the things is in the past, people used to create solutions and then look for problems to solve. I think that has gone away. The second thing is that we now try to co-create. So we create an internal kind of a philosophy. We look at customers and we look at solutions and we say, which of these solutions are really scalable, especially if we take, let's say, an SME kind of a customer base. It has to be a scalable solution, and we go out really and mass market to them. And of course, we do a lot of discovery beforehand to see whether they find it meeting their needs. And if there's take up, well and good. If not, then we got to figure out how to tweak it. So that's one approach. Then there is the other approach where we say we participate or co-create solutions. This is for the bigger customers. And then that works well, because then we are really working with the customers to create those solutions for their business needs. And then they can't say, hey, this is, Mr. Banker, your solution doesn't work. then we can say, sorry, we're creating it together, right? It's our solution. So you tell us how can we make it work? So I think that is another approach which is working well for us. I actually want to go a little bit back to the questions, and I just had 2 comments to make on what Bertrand said about shipping. I think one of the biggest frustrations, and for the right reasons, is that shipping and banking are 2 parallel lines which never meet. And they sort of keep doing their stuff, and there'll be great opportunities for improvement if you could get these 2 to converge and share data. But right now, there is no real reason for them, or no real carrot for them to do that. So there are certain aspects where, yeah, you can see the benefit, but you can't see in a wider sense, but you can't see what is of value to me. And I think we got to bring the value out much more clearly, which is sometimes what we struggle with. I will also take the opportunity to talk about blockchain versus other technology. And I think Bertrand was spot on when he said, we don't look at technology, a particular technology for its own sake, but really look at the problem that it can solve. And I think blockchain has a place, especially in things like sustainable finance, where track and trace are required and hundreds of parties may need to come in and add data. I'm not saying blockchain is the only way to do it, but actually it's a very democratic way of getting people to participate and share data in a safe and secure way. We tried to create a POC in Singapore to solve the problem of trade finance through a trade registry. The POC was on blockchain. But then now when we're taking it to commercialization on a proper commercial platform, we might actually not use blockchain technology. So as you can see, it is a problem to be solved that's important rather than the technology itself, so long as we can get the use cases and the workaround and the working solution right.
Great stuff. We've got a few quick questions coming in from the audience, but before I get to them, I stuck a pin in legislative and regulatory issues, and I'm going to go back to them now. So one of the things that we keep hearing about is the necessity of the adoption of MLETR, the Model Law on Electronic Transferable Records, because without that, several electronic documents just simply aren't legally valid, things like the electronic bill of lading, for example. But if we're realistic, right, enacting legal reform in almost 200 jurisdictions is going to take some time. And it's not necessarily a given that the political will exists to do this. So I wanted to very quickly get a feel from you as to whether trade can actually fully digitize without achieving this. And I'm going to bat that over to Josh.
Yeah, sure. I think absolutely it can. I guess the question is, will it? So there's nothing wrong with having, of course, legal harmonization. But of course, it's a very challenging thing, as you mentioned, right, with everyone trying to follow the same set of laws. I think what's important is that key jurisdictions, we're seeing key jurisdictions adopt it now, will give comfort so that contracts based in those countries, based on the laws of those countries, will then have that backing so that if there is a digital solution or people are using digital records, that they have more confidence to use it. But it isn't legally necessary, right? We've been solving digitization now. The first digital platforms came out 2 decades ago, far before MLETR. And it was just based on everyone signing the same group of rules. And if everyone signs the same group of rules, then the transaction becomes legally binding. So that's still the way digitization is done today. Everyone agrees to the same set of rules, and then you can transact fully digitally. I think as soon as that's covered in the laws of that country, then it's even that much more strong. But I don't think it's necessary. And I really hope that all of this discussion on MLETR and how it has to get adopted by 200 countries doesn't slow down adoption. And people say, oh, it's not legal yet. I can't adopt an EBL solution, or I can't adopt a digital trade finance platform because my country hasn't passed model laws on it. Definitely not. And I think that's the message we want to get out there, is you don't need to wait for this. I think it will help with confidence and certainty, but it definitely isn't a prerequisite.
I think that's a really important point. I want to talk a little bit about regulatory issues with you, Billy, because the work that you're doing sort of around tokenization, I've seen, I think we all have recently, how Ripple has been locked in a bit of a tussle with the SEC for quite a while now over whether it's tokens, which it's, they're used to make payments in trade, whether they're securities or currency. So I just wanted to get a feel from you, Billy, what impact this regulatory uncertainty has on things like tokenization of trade assets. Is technology perhaps moving faster than regulators can keep up?
Well, it is a good question. I think that The technology is something that we need to keep driving forward, really. And how we do that and what we do is try to work within the regulatory frameworks that are available to us. So we look for solutions in jurisdictions where we can take our smart contracts tokenization platform and we can use it with the right participants. So I do think that what's going on with certain regulatory bodies and obviously what you're bringing up is a pretty hot topic in the industry, and we would like to see resolution that is bringing about the opportunity for businesses to really operate. So if you're in the US right now, you're not participating in any type of tokenization that we're working with, because you're not allowed, really, you can't operate in that jurisdiction that we're operating in. So I think that what we really look to do is try to find the best places we can operate. I agree with what Josh is saying, really. I think that, there is this piece where the more jurisdictions or locations where you're able to really start to create the trade, or in, what Josh was talking about, the digitization, where we're able, people actually see the use case working and, realize that actually, having a solution to this is far better for the environment that we're operating in. Like here in the US, if we're really limited to being able to participate in what's going on globally, we're negatively impacting business here. And so I think it's important that, we kind of prove out use cases in jurisdictions that we're able to, and hopefully, that in itself can help drive the jurisdictions which are really trying hard to figure it out, to maybe take a look at it and say, well, here's another path in which we can take. And I don't know what it takes to get things going globally. So far, I don't think there's any actual global, really global agreement on anything that's ever really taken place in any subject. So I can't imagine it's going to happen in trade. But hey, we can all try and really dream that something like that can happen.
Ye of little faith. We're going to make this happen today at this conference. I'm going to go over to a couple of the audience questions that have come in. One of them is pretty interesting. The person asks, well, they say, there is a lot of hype on Web 3.0 and a focus on decentralization now. Do the panelists see this applying to the trade finance business, or do we expect to see the current centralization model continue? Bertrand, I can see you nodding, so I'm going to put you on the spot and ask if you'd like to answer that.
Sure. So I think the debate of decentralization and centralization has always been a key debate for the blockchain perspective, right? And even if you look at right now, the cryptocurrency that's leading, there is a debate about different spectrum of centralization to decentralization, from Ethereum to Solana to other protocol. And from the perspective of trade finance and shipping industry, decentralization could be the ultimate nirvana, the end goal you want to achieve, which means that everybody can play together, things solved. But unfortunately, one of the things that we've noticed in consortium is if you have too many stakeholders, it's almost impossible to make decisions to move quickly to build the first critical steps. So what you actually have to balance is you don't want a single entity or two entities to make all decisions either, because they most likely will make the best decision for them. They will probably take decisions that will be going against some other stakeholder. So you need to build enough size, starting size, but you cannot be completely decentralized. So I think you should compare, let's say, Contour or GSBN. We basically have roughly the same number of shareholders, right? And I think, at least I can speak for myself, that's already a handful to deal with. So I won't ask Josh to comment on that, but it's already a handful to handle. But if you go to full decentralization, where you have, let's say, hundreds, or in the case of a DAO, you can have thousands of people can vote for any single decision, it's very ineffective. So I think that's something that's, in my opinion, the main thing. But if, let's say, GSBN is able to build this foundational infrastructure, and later on, at a later stage, we've clearly defined the rules, the governance, how to make decisions, I don't think it's necessarily a bad decision to switch to Web3 mode, because what we're building effectively is, let's say, a digital utility. It's something for the greater good of the industry. So it actually makes sense for the industry to own it. So everyone who uses it to have a stake in it. So that's actually the ethos of Web3. which I think should apply to the type of foundational platform that we're doing right now.
Great stuff. We've got about 5 minutes left. And there's a question that's come in that I think I'd like all of you to answer sort of in a minute each. And it's, to what extent has the pandemic, lockdowns and other pressures that we've seen in supply chains contributed to a market mood or an impetus for streamlining processes? Basically, boiling that down, what's being asked is, will the events of 2020 be seen as a game changer in the years to come? Or do you think we would have got there regardless? I'm going to start with Sriram.
I think it's a very perceptive question, but as unfortunate as the pandemic has been, the one silver lining has been actually the fact that digitization, at least in the space that I'm in, I can see that that has been accelerated by at least 3 to 4 years worth of progress. So in other words, we would have made this progress over 4 years. We crushed it into 1 year. Part of it was driven because there were all these movement restrictions, and people actually are less willing to walk across into crowded, banking counters and other things. I think it's a positive, and I think it will stay, because what is happening is, I think the customer behavior is changing. We are equally extremely happy working off our phones, buying stuff and doing everything in our daily life. And I think the new generation, it is a generational change. The millennials, the post-millennial generations are much more comfortable using digital means. It's actually, in trade finance, I'm a firm believer that we've never focused on the customer experience and the user interface. And that's really been so pathetic that we actually put off people from using it. And I think we're making good progress, and it is here to stay.
That makes perfect sense to me. Josh, same question to you. Would we have got there anyway?
I think probably 3 to 4 years is a very good estimate, Sriram, that we've sort of definitely accelerated. It's not just the events of 2020, of course, it's 2020 and 2021 now. But I think the biggest impact has been, it's gone from people saying, oh, it's a nice to have, something to experiment with, to now there's sort of an impatience. I think people are now realizing just how much isn't digitized in trade finance and how much work there's still to do. So they're looking at all these platforms saying, okay, I want to join, but why isn't there 10,000 people in the network yet? Why hasn't EBLs been fully adopted in all my shipping lines yet? So I think now there's almost an impatience around it, which is, I think, going to even further accelerate the adoption of these solutions and that sort of convergence. I don't know how many years that's going to make a difference on, but it's still going to be a long journey. It's not going to change overnight, but I think, it's a very good point, Sriram, about the focus on customer experience. I think that has to drive everything. And I think that's what we're seeing now.
Yeah, I like the are we there yet narrative, and I'm going to hand that over to Bertrand. Do you think that we're going to get there anytime soon? What needs to happen today so that in 6 months' time, a year's time, we're not back here having the same conversation?
Well, I think at least for one aspect, suddenly everybody know about shipping industry and logistics, which I think right now, every 2 weeks, every 2 days is an article about logistic disruption, about the cancellation of Christmas, about how some retail in US is charting their own boat. Suddenly everybody learn about logistics, which it's unfortunate for the consumer, but great for a project like GSBN, right? So to answer your question, would we see the transformation? Yes, eventually, I think it would have happened, because it's not possible for one industry to stay not digitized, but you may have taken another 20 years or 30 years. It's very likely, because the ecosystem and the business, the market structure of the shipping industry makes it really hard to digitize. Now, what I think is happening, what we are getting from the pandemic is you start to see two group of people. So some people are literally fighting day in, day out to resolve the supply chain issue they have today, right? They're fighting for their life, they're trying to survive. And some other people, they're saying, okay, so we are trying to think about what is coming next. Yeah. So this creative destruction that's happening in the industry, from the shipper, the suppliers, and business region, everything's changing, plus ESG, plus so many new concepts coming in, there are new opportunities. So you really see the track between two type of actor in the market. And I think that's really the catalyst. That's really the catalyst we're going to see.
I'm so sorry, but we're out of time. This has been a fantastic conversation. Thank you all so much for your insights. Look forward to continuing the conversation going forward. And hopefully when we meet again, we won't be having the same conversation again. So thank you to all of you once again, and thank you to the audience for joining us.